foremost, I would like to thank each and every one of you for taking out time from your busy schedules and being a part of this event tonight. Today, we have a very, very special guest amongst us that I believe that words cannot do justice to such a dynamic and vibrant person she is. A passionate leader, a businesswoman, a public speaker, and a politician. Rana Bokhari is a force to be reckoned with. Elected leader of the Manitoba Liberal Party in 2013, she was the first minority woman to ever lead a major political party in the Canadian history. She was the youngest to ever lead the Manitoba Liberal Party and now owns her own law firm in Manitoba, where she is mainly practicing in corporate and Aboriginal law. That's very close to her heart, I know that. From humble beginnings, Rana has been a beacon of hope for so many first-generation Canadian women as she continues to break barriers that women of color face in all leadership roles. Rana's accomplishments have been many, and I feel that I'm honored and blessed that I was a part of her election campaign, and I learned a lot from her. She's an individual who believes in defying all the odds. She's not someone who follows the norms. Instead, tend to make her own mark and pave her own way in life. While working with her, I was able to recognize the innumerable tasks and encounters Rana had to face every single day. And yet, in the face of those hurdles, she chose to persevere, she chose to fight. From me, Rana Bokhari is not a winner, she's a victor. Because who has successfully broken the glass ceiling against every woman in power. She's not only brave, but dedicated, passionate, and ardent against all negativity and criticism that comes all her way. Being a woman of color myself, and now that I'm a part of the political arena, I know the stigma that comes along this territory. So I can proudly say that women like Rana Bokhari, who have encouraged and made me who I am today, who has taught me to be positive, to be strong, and to be unwavering and steadfast no matter what comes our way. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call my very, very dear friend, my mentor, and an exemplary figure for all of us, none other than Rana Bokhari.
Assalamualaikum everyone. Do I look very short? Can you actually see me over the podium? So, good evening everyone. What I normally do, and today just feels like a really important night to have a very frank discussion. So, as you saw, I walked up with a speech, and what's going to end up happening is that most likely I'm going to just talk, and I'm just going to do my best to exchange some very positive ideas and positive words, and hopefully we can come up with some solutions of how we move forward as women in color, as Muslim women in color, as young women in politics and leadership, as CEOs, as managers, whatever it is that we want to do. But before I do that, I have a very soft heart, and I do things because they're very meaningful to me. So it's of course my absolute pleasure to be joining you tonight. There's nothing really more I can say. I'm so happy to be here because every single time that I come to Mississauga, I feel like I'm coming to visit my second home. I feel like I'm coming to visit family. The way that you embrace me and you hug me, which is, I love being hugged, and everything else that you guys do to make me feel welcome. It gets to my heart, and I really want to thank you for that. Hifsa, your words touched me and actually made me quite emotional, which is why I'm a little scattered right now. But thank you for that. And your team as well. I know that there's a lot of your team here, and I'm inspired by them, and I'm inspired by you. So thank you for all that you do. So I'm going to begin this discussion. I'm going to reiterate and acknowledge the land that we are currently on. And I say this not as this throwaway comment, but I say it as a sincere acknowledgement that I would not be standing before you as a first-generation Pakistani woman if it had not been for our Indigenous brothers and sisters and the good faith with which they entered into the relationships that they did to allow us to be on this land. I also say that, and I say it very humbly, in an effort to highlight for you all, that we must recognize that our collective responsibility to stand as allies with our Indigenous brothers and sisters in their fight towards fairness, towards justice, towards equality, as Canada attempts to reconcile the harms of the past. As Canadians, and especially as immigrants and first and second generation Canadians, there should be nothing more important to us, and I can say that truly from the bottom of my heart. There are not many things that are more important to me tonight than that relationship and to passing on that knowledge. So tonight I will be talking to you about my experience as leader of a political party in Manitoba. I was 35 years old when I was elected as leader of a major political party in Manitoba. I was one of 26 leaders to ever lead that party since 1882. I was the youngest, and I was the very first minority Muslim woman to ever lead a political party in Canadian history. That role and that position was absolutely not handed to me. I fought for it, and tonight it is so important, and I'm going to discuss some of the barriers that I faced as a woman of color in that position. The first thing that normally people ask me is, Rana, why did you do it? Why would you put yourself through that? Well, more so than partisan politics, the nastiness of partisan politics, I believed that women of color with merit deserved an equal opportunity to be on those stages. And tonight, I hope more so than anything else that young women realize that the door has been opened for them. But our fight has just begun. And we need to recognize that the barriers we will face, and there will be many barriers, but we need to unite, to empower each other, to have a meaningful voice, and to be true agents of change. As we gather here tonight, let's reflect on the fact that we know who we are. The threads of our race, our religion, our gender, our age, our experience, they weave together to create each and every unique person in this room and in this country. We are not all meant to be the same. Our country's strength is in the fact that we are different. Sadly, however, there are still those people who believe that our place is and should always be below theirs. They welcome us as helpers, but never as ones to lead. But that does not mean that we back down. It also doesn't mean that we bury our heads in the sand and pretend that our women, that women of color, including Indigenous women, their battles are very unique. And that acknowledgement is our starting point tonight. And we need to take those challenges head on, and I believe that we can do it. And to that end, I believe that we need to take, as our own community, a page out of the books of our Indigenous sisters. Because, ladies and gentlemen, as strong as we may think that we are, there is no group of women that have shown more strength, more resilience, more tenacity in every aspect of life than our Indigenous sisters. In their history, they were taken away from their families as children, and they survived. Currently, their children are being ripped away from them, and they keep fighting. Cultures and institutions of our country are blatantly racist against them. And they continue to survive. They sing, they dance, they pray, they drum, and if as a Muslim woman like me, I go into their communities, they swing their doors open, and they make their home my home. So again, if you want to know what strength is, if you want to know what resilience is, if you want to see the true power of our mothers, our sisters, our grandmas, our daughters, look to them. Because I promise you, you have never seen such strength. They are my role models. And I know I have limited time today, and I have so much that I want to say. But there was no way that I was going to start this conversation without addressing our responsibility. So let me begin by talking about my experience as leader of a political party. And I want to also acknowledge, for the sake of this conversation, and address the fact that leadership is very different than MPs, MPPs, MLAs, whatever your province is. So for me specifically, I'm coming from a lens, and I'm coming from a place of that leadership where you are guiding, you are leading, and you are directing. And if people follow you or not, that's the question. I'm going to touch on a few things, and I can promise you if I had the time, I would talk about a whole host of things. But I'm going to talk a little bit about having a voice, an agency. I'm going to talk about religion versus culture. And I want to also talk about my specific experiences in the media as a woman, the language that's used, and all the things that come with being a woman in those positions. And lastly, I'm going to address how we can move forward as a community to support our own women as they go through these challenges. So we were talking about how to do this tonight, and I had requested, and HIFSA's team is so fantastic that, you know, they just essentially help me out in any way I can. I wanted to be able to have a question and answer period. So there's cards on your tables right now, so if you feel like you have a question for me, someone will come around and pick them up at some point. So let's talk about qualities. The qualities that make women worthy of being a leader are very different than the qualities that make men worthy of being a leader. For example, if I was to be a bold woman who speaks with conviction, I would be labeled as aggressive. And if a man was to speak with conviction and direction, he would be labeled as what? He'd be labeled as assertive. In leadership, assertive is a positive quality. Aggression is a negative quality. So if we both do the exact same thing, I, as a woman leader, will be labeled as aggressive, which is a very negative term. My counterpart will be labeled as assertive, which is a very positive term. Yet we've both done the exact same thing. If I was to speak with empathy and show kindness and show softness to other candidates, to other leaders, to other people, I would be seen as weak, I would be seen as emotional, I would possibly be seen as unstable. If a man was to see, and we see this in TV all the time, we have leaders who cry on TV, right? And what does the world say? Wow, our ministers, our MPPs, our MLAs, our prime ministers crying on TV. Wonderful, wonderful. That makes him strong. That makes him powerful. That makes him in connection to his femininity. We both did the same thing, right? And we all have the same merit. So we're at the starting point, education, our competency, we're at the exact same point. Should be able to question that, correct? So suppose I did question that. Suppose I said, those who are criticizing my aggression and my emotion, why are you doing that? Why would you question that? I'm just being a normal, sensible woman. Why would you question that? Well, if you were to stand up for yourself, if you were to show strength and stand up for yourself, which every woman should, we don't want our sisters and our daughters and our mothers being stepped on by somebody else, correct? If I was to do that, what do you think they would say to me? Well, Rana, you're flippant, you're rude, you're obnoxious, you have no manners, right? You're not prim and proper, Rana. So, guess that makes you an incompetent leader, right? So language, the language that we use to describe women is never going to be, until we acknowledge it and address it, equal to the language we use for men. And if that language describes worthiness, right? So if the worthiness of a leader is described as an assertive leader, and a woman could never be assertive because she's always aggressive, it makes the job very difficult. It makes the job very, very difficult, and it makes it a no-win situation until we start talking about it. So, how do you overcome these challenges? How do you overcome challenges when, other than language, your worthiness to be a leader is questioned based on race, based on religion, based on gender, based on age? So we've kind of already dealt with the language part. What language makes you worthy? Okay, well I can't get to that point as a woman. So let's take the next step. Right? So can you be a worthy leader? Can you be a leader if you have your age, your gender, your religion, all these other barriers that are going to box you in? Right? Because women of color, women like us, we have to deal with the challenges of being a leader, but we have to deal with those challenges in this confine of this box of race, religion, gender, age. So if I was to overcome the fact that I'm a woman leader, they would look at your color and they'd be like, well, that's your next barrier. You go ahead and you overcome that. Overcome the challenges of the color of your skin. And if you overcome the challenge of your skin, overcome the challenges of your religion. And if you overcome the challenges of the color of your skin, and you overcome the challenges of your religion, and you overcome the challenges of your gender, well, what's next? You've done age, you've done religion, you've done gender. Essentially, you're in a no-win situation, right? So, if those are the initial barriers, how do we overcome that publicly, and how do we overcome that within our community? And I think that the answer is very long, and the answer is very convoluted, and I hope that some of you will ask me that question when it's Q&A time. So I want to kind of talk about how I got here. I rarely ever have any conversation, whether it's in media or whether it's in front of a group of people, without acknowledging my mom and my dad and the blessings that they are to my world and my life. So I don't come from a political family. My family story is like many of your families, like many immigrant families in Canada. My parents came to Canada, like many of us, with no connections to anyone, like no real connections to mainstream society. And they made the greatest sacrifice for their children. And every single day, every moment, every hour I have, I honor that blessing. My greatest role model for me is my mom. She's absolutely the strongest woman I know. And I think that many of you will be able to see yourself in her. She was the youngest of 7 siblings, had an arranged marriage when she was very young, came to Canada with my dad. And she broke every traditional mold with a strong, supportive, caring partner in my dad. My dad supported my mom supported my dad, and both my parents supported me every single step of the way in my life. And I'm only able to do what I do every single day because my mom and dad, the family culture within my home, not the greater culture, but the family culture within my home allowed me to do that. It wasn't always their words. Their actions demanded that I was never to limit my dreams to fit someone else's definition of what we're supposed to be. So I ask you to imagine if our women could carry that unwavering belief in their self-worth and their abilities into adulthood to be agents of change for the bigger world. Imagine where our women would be, and imagine where our community would be, and imagine what we could do. There are so many times that we will be afraid to speak up. In politics, and I feel like there's a lot of politicians in this room or relatives. There's people know, so I think you'll understand this. And I want you to listen to this very closely because it's really the worst thing that we can do to each other. In politics, if you want to hurt one of our women, you attack their character. That's what you do. It is petty, it is small, it is narrow-minded, and it is the path to failure, and it is the path to never achieve what we are meant to do as Muslims, as Pakistanis, as Syrians, as Palestinians, as Afghanis, whoever we are. That is the worst thing that you can do to a female candidate, is attack her character. Yet, that is what happens. That is what we choose to do. That's what the outside world chooses to do because they know that's our weakness. Right? Like it's a political game. That's what they know how to get to you. They attack your character because they know that's your weakness. So to overcome that within ourselves is our responsibility. To overcome that on a greater level is our responsibility. To overcome that within our families is our responsibility. There's nobody else. It's only us. We lead the way. We make changes. That's good. You give me a break. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. So I just wanted to acknowledge that part because I think that when I was running, it was a big challenge for me. You know, it was a big challenge for me, and I see it happening to a lot of other of our women who get into this field. And I think that I would just suggest, and I would advise, and I would talk to us, and we should have that conversation that when those things are happening, regardless of partisanship, regardless of anything else, whether you like somebody or not, whether you agree with them or not, we could never allow that to continue to happen, and we can't allow us to sit in a room when that conversation is happening. It is our responsibility to stand up and say absolutely not. If you want to attack somebody on their policy, please attack them on their policy. Or their credibility, please attack them on their credibility. Right? That's fair. But not to that point. And I'm saying this because I know, because I went through it. It was funny because it was 2013. So if you think about this, it's almost 5 or 6 years ago now. It was July 2013 when I announced that I was going to run for leadership. And my first experience was me driving in a car with my communications director and finding out that somebody had leaked that I was going to announce my candidacy the next day, and a major news outlet calling me on the phone within 5 minutes of that. You know, and I was pretty new to the game, so I get them on the phone and my communications director is sitting next to me. And at that moment, sitting in that car, I was under the belief, I was under the impression that we had come so far in supporting women in positions of leadership and power. We've come so far. Rana, it's time. You can do this. We've come so far. But the minute somebody got on the phone with me, it was amazing how my presence still evoked this sense of wonder when they were reporting it. They couldn't believe it. How do we deal with her? How do we manage her? How do we talk to her? And it was that moment when I realized how far from the truth that idea of women coming so far really is. It was my first interview, and somebody thought it was appropriate to ask me, Rana, what do you like? What's your passion? What are you into? And without me even having a moment to respond, she says, puppies? Right? Because I clearly can't have any sensibility. You know, I'm an educated woman with a law degree, a criminology degree, a psychology degree. I've won awards for public service. You know, I was already established within my career and other careers, right? So clearly, the only thing I could like is puppies. And you know, at that moment, in my world and in my head, I should have realized right then and there that I was in for the fight of my life. But I didn't. I truly, truly thought it was a one-off, and my actions and my integrity and my merit is what I was going to be judged on. Because that's only fair, right? Absolutely not. It was incredible that all the things that I could do to make things perfect when I was in a position of power, you couldn't do it. It was an uphill battle. Why? Because there was preconceived ideas about my race, my religion, my age, my gender. And those were the very things that got me to where I was. It was my religion that got me to where I was. It was my faith. It was my gender. I was a strong female with a strong female role model. It was my age. I had the energy and the tenacity to do anything. And it was my race. Because despite hearing about how oppressed our women are, I knew for a fact that we as Pakistani women specifically are probably some of the most strongest women out there. And while everyone else is trying to celebrate the US presidency and the Hillary Clintons of the world, we had beat down that barrier years ago. We've already done that. What's next? Right? It was our own countries that showed that, and it was our own countries that did that. Yet we shy away when they call us to oppress. Oh, those downridden Muslims. Oh, they're women, they can't get out of their house and they can't do anything. Is that factually true? Fair enough, it's probably factually true in every case. I'm sure there's a lot of places that would be factually true. But what I would suggest, and what I would ask, is that the next time we read that in a paper, or we see it on the news, or we see it somewhere, maybe it's time for us to speak up. Maybe it's time to respond as an op-ed about what's factually true and what's not. And maybe it's time for us to not be afraid of being called terrorists and being called weak and being called all of these things that they're going to call us when we stand up. Maybe it's time for us to not let people get away with it anymore. So there's a difference between having a voice and having agency. And as a leader, I had a voice. I had a platform and I was able to have a voice. But to have agency, and I believe our communities do not have agency right now. To have agency, it means that our voice is so valued, that it's taken so seriously, that it allows others to use that voice to implement change. That doesn't happen right now. Today, what we see is this idea that if I put a young Muslim woman as a leader, well, they could never say that we didn't support her because they put that one token woman up there. Right? I don't believe in tokenism. I don't believe that we have agency. I also don't believe that we should be accepting the, okay, well, you can't say that we're not supporting you because we put that one person in there. That's not what we're looking for. That's not what we're looking for. What we're actually looking for is proportional representation, right? If Canada is this diverse and we're so grateful for the diversity. If we're this diverse community, then maybe our lawmakers, and maybe our politicians, and maybe our MPs and MPPs and MLAs in Manitoba, or whatever, whoever it may be. Maybe it's our CEOs, and maybe it's our teachers, and our principals, and our doctors, and our nurses. Maybe they should be proportionally some of our people. We are some of the most educated people in this country, factually. Women make up 50.4% of the Canadian population right now. There's a point where women of color will make up more than half the population. Which means that if we choose, and again we have choices, if we choose to not vocalize our challenges, if we choose to not talk about the barriers that we're going to face as women in these positions, and if our culture within our families and outside of our families doesn't start to manage what is about to happen in our country, and we are either a part of it, so we have agency, so we can affect change, or we get left behind. And these are choices that we have. These are our choices that we have. Now, with the choices that we don't have, is how people are going to treat us. That's not going to be our choice. When I was running, my gender and my age were a constant source of amusement amongst many. Words with like negative connotations, like rookie and neophyte, they used them often to describe me. And that was just really further evidence of something I already knew on that first phone call. That the gatekeepers of political entry really just wanted the same old people playing in their little sandbox. It was within my first year as leader, in a conversation about taxation, in a room full of men, with a chief of staff who was a man, big guy, 6'2", huge, and I'm just like 4'11", and we're all standing around having a conversation about taxation. And it was funny because my comment at that point, well, they stole it after anyway, so when I said it, it wasn't relevant. When somebody else said it, it was all of a sudden brilliant. But you know, at that moment, I'm standing there, and essentially it was the middle of a conversation, and I said something, and this, 6'4", Caucasian man, older guy, kind of looks at me and then pats me on the head. There, honey, there, sweetheart, there, dear. And it was funny because my initial gut reaction, right, the reaction that you would learn from your mom and dad or your family or your internal family structure, what we would teach our daughters would be, you're never going to take that. You would never accept that. And actually, I would not have accepted that, except for the fact that I had a chief of staff with me who kind of just grabbed my arm and said, Rana, you are a political figure and you are a leader. What they should have told me is, Rana, you are a strong, competent woman of merit in a position of leadership, and you should never accept that. But that's not what happened. It's a pretty good comparison, right? If a woman in a position of power is called a girl, we're all okay with that. Girl, it's no big deal. If I went up to the Premier of Manitoba, who's a male, or, the Prime Minister, who's a male, and called him a boy instead of a man, how acceptable would that really be? Not for a second. Not for a second. When we're talking about gender in politics or gender in leadership, you also immediately have to talk about presentation. How does she present herself? And we talked about language already, But for me, I actually have curly hair. Like, factually, my hair is actually very curly. And the minute I got into politics, I had to start straightening it. You know, you gotta start straightening your hair because curly hair shows this like wild, you know, this wild little 4'11" girl, you know? Totally not factually true, but that's what that presentation shows, right? Start straightening my hair because you want it to look more appropriate and sensible and grown up. And it's not just me. It's not just me. It's all women in politics, it's all women in leadership, it's all women in roles like that, who are kind of trying to break barriers in the bigger world. Like so many women before me, I did everything I could to present as a female leader. We're still not at the point where we can just call ourselves leaders. And in case maybe we've never had this conversation, or you amongst yourselves have never had this conversation, being feminine and smart, unlikely. It's an unlikely duo. Apparently, you can't be presenting yourself as a strong, intelligent, confident woman and actually look decent. Because you can't be both. You cannot be both, apparently. You're either Bambi, so when I was, you know, empathetic or, you know, caring or showing kindness, I was Bambi. Or I was harsh, I was aggressive, and then I was flippant. The point is, being a competent woman was never enough. And when these things were happening to me personally, I internalized it all. I took it inside of me. Because like many women before me, when the list of qualities that makes you a good leader is limited, so are your options. When it came to my race or my religion, it was no easy. It was not easier at all. From a seasoned journalist calling my staff, wanting to do a story about how one brown girl in the premier's office looks just like Rana. The only thing in common between us two was the color of our skin. There was nothing else in common between us. I guess nobody told him that all brown people don't look alike. Or the fact that when it came to religion, because I wasn't married, I didn't have children, you know, when they wanted to criticize me and get to my family, who would they attack? My brothers, my family, my dad. They'd go to the males, right? Because, you know, you can't just attack me as me, you gotta go to the family because clearly this is not enough. One of the most telling moments throughout that entire journey was when a letter 4 days before an election goes out to my entire riding, calling me a terrorist. She's a terrorist. CSIS is after her. She doesn't support these rights and these rights and these rights, and she's going to bring Sharia law into Manitoba because I have that much power and strength, apparently. But the fact that it happened was one thing. The fact that it never got reported, the fact that it was never a story, the fact that nobody acknowledged it or talked about it or even brought it up to show how wrong it was to the general public, that was the part. And that was one of the key moments when I had to make that decision of whether I wanted voice in my life or if I wanted to have agency in my life. Do I want to just go out and be able to talk about things without really affecting change? I really don't think that that's a good use of my time. Or do I want the ability to do things at a grassroots level, to actively and effectively make change? And that's what we wanted to do. There's all these conversations about feminism right now, right? There's all these conversations. It's mainstream society right now to talk about feminism. Well, my view on that, some would probably call it quite critical, and a lot of people won't agree with it. But I have to ask, whose version of feminism is that? Whose version? Is it a privileged version of feminism? Or is it the version of feminism that women of color, including Indigenous women, face? We're not all this homogenous group. We're not just all this, all women are one. It's like this umbrella. That's not factually true. When people out there talk about facts and they say, oh, well, equal pay for equal work, women make 74 cents on the dollar. Oh, no. Compared to men, actually. 74 cents compared to men on the dollar. That's not actually factually true for me, because women of color and Indigenous women, we make 64% and 54% on the dollar. So when you're out there and you're talking, and people are talking about feminism and equal rights and all this stuff, I think that maybe it's time for us to question, who are you specifically talking about? Because in my opinion, if you wanted to move your country forward and your communities forward, would you not look to the most vulnerable and build from the grass up? It could, because it's in my opinion and in my view, if you were going to empower somebody, would you not want to empower the people who are struggling the most? Because when you're empowering them, all of your communities are being lifted. So I know there's a lot of conversation about that, and I really want to just touch on that, and I know it's not a popular opinion amongst many. That's not our feminism. That's not. For us, when we're talking about us, the barriers are your race, your religion, your gender, and if you're young, your age. Our color of our skin can't be ignored. Our religion can't be ignored. These aren't things that we can just ignore, because when we are doing stuff, we are doing it within the confines of that box. That's the world within which we work. And for those people who want to celebrate all the first and the first and the first, great, celebrate them. But remember, are you being used by the institutions, by being the token, or not? I was not willing to be the token. I accepted the fact that I was the first female Muslim leader in Canada. So I was willing to accept that, but I was not willing to be the token. So, as women, before we get into questions, because I think the questions really want to spend some time, because hopefully you guys have some good ones. For women or any allies of women, and I believe that our men are our allies. I believe that our families are our allies. I believe that my dad, my brother, my sister, my grandpa, my uncle are my allies. When we're struggling to breathe in that suffocating box imposed on us by those who are advocating for diversity, but they really just want the status quo. When that stuff is happening, specifically for our sisters, we have to go very deep inside of yourself, and you have to let your faith and your instincts guide you. There is no one person that can help us break those barriers when you're confined within that box. Why? Because we are far and few between. There's no books written on us. Many of us are first generation. We don't come from political names or political dynasties. Our networks, our connections are minimal compared to those who have been here for generations. Which means we are the ones that are responsible for breaking through those barriers. And as a community, we are responsible for supporting those who are trying to break through those barriers. Being the first was always hard. I can attest to that. The first one who ever fought for the vote, the first one who ever flew a plane, the first, it was always challenging. But I think that we're at a crux moment right now, and we have to realize that we are going through our first right now. This is our battle. We're in it. We're in it. So I would ask that we, together as a community, within our communities, within our families, within our family structure and in the greater communities, we have to rise to the occasion. We have to rise to the occasion. So your conversations with your youth are with that in mind. That our battle cannot be within ourselves. Right? We can't be fighting within ourselves. Our battle, and it's not even a battle. You know, I don't even know if it's a battle. I think it's a desire to move forward. It's inspiration. How do you get to the next one? So, for everyone, if you find yourselves in these places where you're afraid of speaking up because you don't want to be ridiculed, you're afraid of speaking up because you don't want to be seen, appear as weak, you don't want to be called the labels that they're going to call you. If they're going to make fun of you because you reacted to things that you should never have accepted in the first place, all we can do is support each other and go within ourselves. So, lastly, to every young girl, and I know there's so many beautiful ones in this room tonight, if you're dreaming those big dreams like I once did, and I spoke to a few of you today, so I know you are, go further. Take it one step further. Acknowledge your worth, acknowledge your self-respect, speak with conviction, speak with passion, fight for your families, lift each other up, and don't allow other people's desire to hold us down be imposed on us. Don't allow that to be imposed on us. I can't end this before questions without talking about First Nations and our Indigenous community just one last time, because I think that we need to recognize our responsibility. I don't say that as just, a throwaway conversation, this thing that we just forget about after we leave here. We have a responsibility to our First Nations families. We have a responsibility to be their allies. We have a responsibility to go and stand with them even when they're not asking for it. Just stand with them. They need us, and there is no better ally for that community than people like us who've already struggled for so long. We support our Palestinian communities, we support our Syrian communities, we support all these communities who are dealing with the same thing elsewhere. This is happening within our own backyards. And we are living happily, openly, with freedom, for religious freedom, for all the stuff that we're allowed to do on their backs. We're doing it on their backs. So I'm going to ask you, and I know I'm very passionate about it. It is my heart. There's no people who I look up to or respect more than our Indigenous First Nations communities. Specifically, their women. So when you're hearing the stereotypical stuff, when you're hearing things that are not factual, please don't believe what you hear and don't believe what you see. The world is created to hold them down. And we never want that to be us, right? So let's try to lift them up as well. Thank you very much. I want to open it up to questions. So before we move forward, I have my two questions, and I appreciate them, and I think that there's more coming. But I'm from Manitoba. I'm not from Toronto. I'm not from Mississauga, like I said. I'm just this random, person from Manitoba who loves your community. But more so than loving your community, there is a young, beautiful, tenacious powerhouse of a candidate running for nomination here today. If I told you about her integrity, you probably wouldn't believe me. If I spoke to you about her honesty, if I spoke to you about her power and her passion and her commitment, not only to her community, but to the Mississauga Arid Mills community, you would actually be baffled by it, because every time I've spoken to her, I was baffled by it, so much so that I got on a plane and flew all the way over here to speak to you tonight. Wow, that's a lot of questions. It's like 20 questions, great. Not only do I want to And I know she's a very humble person, you know, and I'm sorry, I didn't tell you I was going to have this conversation about you, and I hope you are okay with this. I just want everyone to take a hard look at who she is as a person. I would ask that you take the time to get to know the woman and the mother and the sister to me that she has been. This is somebody during my worst moments in my campaign got on a plane only having met me one time and saw a sister halfway across the country struggling. Got on a plane and landed in Manitoba to help me out. And what many people don't know is that letter I spoke about, calling me a terrorist. It was HIFSA and one volunteer who found that letter. It was her. She opened up a mailbox and there it was. And she came to me and she was almost in tears. You know, Rana, why are they doing this? Why are they saying these things? You know? And from that moment on, that sincerity and that passion, like, I will never forget it. So not only will I come down and help with your nomination, but I'll be here when you are the nominated candidate, inshallah. And we as a community, if we can do me a favor, help. Help in any way you can. Get your people out on that nomination date. We're going to talk political strategy for 5 seconds. It's a numbers game. If you don't show up to vote, she's not getting it. So get your people out. Don't make me have to come back and call you, because I'm asking so deeply in my heart. I want to come back and celebrate this with you guys. I want to come back and celebrate this accomplishment of this another strong Muslim powerhouse leading. So that's my thing to you, and I you know, I have your back 100%, Hifsa. So I hope you succeed here. Inshallah. I want to thank you all. Hifsa, I'm here for you, and I hope that you guys had a wonderful evening. I know I touched on a lot of things, but let's eat some food and have some fun and talk and mingle, and I'm around to answer any more questions. Thank you very much.